What is up? It's your boy the Canologist. We're doing another code study session, OSRS AFK training, making some cannonballs. I just want to go through a bit of architecture for the Golang client-side course on boot dev. So we're going to monoliths and decoupling. Architecture in software can mean many different things. Yes, it can. High-level architecture of a web application from a structural standpoint. We're more concerned with the separation or lack thereof between front end and back end. We talk about coupling in this context. We're talking about coupling between the data and the presentation logic of that data. I'm using Freeform for my notes as well, if you guys are wondering where I get all these whiteboards from. I used to use like Miro, but I switched to Freeform once I got my iPad. It's just been really clean in terms of how I structure the data. And presentation logic of that data. Tightly coupled front end then this is the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And then for mobile, this is the compiled code downloaded to the device. We call this presentation logic. For the back end, videos and comments. Keep chunking at this stack of steel bars. I'm basically doubling my money doing this. But I digress because it's very complicated. On the surface, it looks like I'm just simply doing some stuff. Tweets, comments for YouTube. You can't embed YouTube videos directly into the app. Backend is basically all the raw data and how you manage it. Okay, let's look into the monolith. A monolithic architecture. Most of this is just like writing down really, really good notes on topics that you want to explore. So here we go. Let's open this in anew. So this is us requesting the site. We get the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript back. Now we go to API. Posts. Then we get back some post data. How does that make it monolithic though? Okay, let's go to the next part and then decoupled. Let's see. We're basically chunking the data down, the lesson down into a manageable piece of information. So that way I can write effective code around these concepts. So monolithic single large program contains all the functionality of front end and back end. Single large program contains front end and back end. Common for web apps. Some may host REST API. For raw data. Okay, so it says there are more tightly coupled kinds of monoliths. Inject dynamic data. Directly into the HTML. Injection is typically more performant. WordPress builders work this way. I think about 70% of websites in America are like WordPress. Don't quote me on that. Okay. Now we got decoupled. Shit, this guy's like smithing it fast. Okay, decoupled. Once we get through decoupled, then we'll kind of call it for this session, and then we'll get into the code the next one. I'm just curious as to oh shit, I'm near 8K, so that's like near the next level actually. Jeez. One where the front end or back end are separated into different code bases. Into different code bases. For example, the front end might be hosted by a static file server. Well, that's actually pretty common. Like when you do go to repos, you'll see front end, back end, and that's like a decoupled thing, whereas the monolith would have both. front end and back end. Depending on whether the load balancer is sitting in front of a decoupled architecture, I feel like this one's more easier to manage because you can just separate your logic for the front end and back end, and that way if one part breaks, like the whole thing doesn't just crash, because I could totally see that happening. Depending on whether or not load balancers, our API may be hosted on subdomain or on a subpath as shown. A decoupled architecture allows for both. I don't think that's important though to what we're trying to do. What's mainly important is front end and back end on different code bases. Yeah, that looks like it. We will get into the code in the next session. So that's pretty much monoliths. Everything's enclosed into one, the logic for the front end and the back end. So how the data gets displayed and presented and stored. So that's monolith is when you basically have all of that in one place, and a decoupled monolith is when you just split your front end and back end into separate servers and stuff like that. So you could have a static file server. So for example, my front end for theknologist.com, let's go to my fantastic website. One sec, let me just... This is hosted on Vercel, and the back end actually, where I host my blog, all the raw data for this blog, this is actually hosted on Notion, believe it or not. This is actually hosted on Notion. So I basically use Notion for my backend because it's got a table, and then I just want to make, I have an integration that allows me to basically connect to Notion and then update my blogs and have all that running. And then on the front end, I have Vercel, which keeps my web page up, and I have my React architecture, and I use injection. So all the stateful parts of my React. So let's go to the stateful parts and I'll show you. So for example, like this, it's a single page, and then it just manages state really, really well. Go to my blog, for example. Everything is stateful, projects, all these things follow an architecture, and they all follow the same template. See a square, highlighted box, these things, the skills. They follow all these little templates. All these are just sub templates of things. So then whenever I just want to add another item, we can just add it and then change the data inside. So it's the same structure. I just put in the logo and the words. It's the same structure, just put in the photo and the title and all this stuff. It's all the same. Even the icons, right? It's all the same component used. It's just a different picture for the logo and a different link, right? And then light dark mode, same thing. Everything stays in the same place, just change the colors. See? And that's basically how you inject into your stateful front end. And that's all hosted on Vercel, by the way. So back end, I was going to use Postgres, but since it's just a simple blog here, I just opted to use Notion, and it works pretty well. So in the next guide, we're going to go back and actually complete the code for this assignment. So if you like this, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, comment below. Let's go into architecture and get better. Knologist out.